see. Do you want me to pull up the participants here so I get your name and then I can make you a presenter? So changing your role to presenter, you should now or very quickly, very soon have some buttons that you can share your presentation.
Now, do you have it loaded, Bob, or do I have to load it?
I do not have it loaded. I do have it. I can bring it up, but it.
Yeah, if you do it that way, because I've run into issues before when I've tried to load as a presenter.
Ah, all right. Well, then I will take back control.
Okay.
And let's see. I'm already sharing my screen, so I just got to pull up that file. Bear with me just a couple of seconds here. It shouldn't take too long, depending upon how fast the internet's working. Programs.
So this is an introduction to what generation is not considered the technology savvy generation by actually definition.
Yes, right. A real live example. All right. And
we just see your smiling face right now, Bob.
What's that?
We just see your smiling face.
Well, I'm going to share here. Let's see. Turn off my camera for a second and then share screen. All right. I believe we all just now see my screen. Is that correct?
Yeah, we can see it.
All right. Again, this is John Choate from SAP Global. Welcome, John. Take it away.
Thank you, Bob. Well, I want to welcome all of you to an interesting topic that I actually started about a year ago because I work in a 5-generation workforce. And a lot of it, there's a lot of interpersonal skills and understanding. So when I first originally wrote this, I was really surprised by the reaction, and is actually published globally to over 300,000 PMs around the world as a must-read. And then I've had universities as well as companies ask me to present this and talk about it. So a little about the 5 generations and how it affected me was I grew up on my grandparents. So I had a complete different attitude on dealing with people. You'll sort of see that as I talk to it. And then a little some people don't know about me is my undergraduate was research biology, but I specialize in actually genetic engineering and anthropology as a minor. So a lot in generations in that. Can I advance it, Bob, or do you need to?
I will have to do that.
Okay, why don't you advance it to it? So here under the table of contents, so we're going to talk about generations, sort of like what that means, how do you define it, and you'll hear a lot of different things, and that's why the questions. And then an interesting slide I have is, can you identify yourself with a generation based on a significant event? And then we're going to talk about characteristics, values, beliefs. And here's an interesting one. There are values that span all generations. And I think you'll be surprised and when you see what they are. What are the ways of communication today? You know, there's verbal, there's digital, sign language. If Bob had mentioned it, I've lived in other countries. So there are some really interesting challenges to communication, even in today's workforce. And then talk about what is today's workforce and what are the 5 generations that are in today's workforce. And then what are the challenges? And there are challenges. And then what are some learning styles that are going on now to be more effective in communication? And then what are the stages of instruction that are pretty well practiced now to be effective to communicate a message? And then for training, I sort of split it between pre-COVID, and then I added on COVID because now this is a whole new world that we're dealing in and how we communicate. Are we face-to-face? Do we get in a room? How big is the room? Do we wear our mask? Do we not? So this is a pretty interesting topic. And then I have avoidance in learning. So key here is, what are things to avoid that are going to make you effective in communication? And there are some, and it's pretty interesting. Then we got into one of the questions, what is the 10-20 rule? And this is a new standard that has been pretty well being used now and benchmarked by a lot of companies, mainly because the amount of lack of time people have. So it's getting you to be more focused in what this rule means. And then what I added here is Asq Hop Topics. And what I've done in presentations, it's very interesting to say, based upon your particular world, and actually this is interesting and fun, and your generation, what do you see as the priority? And sometimes it's really interesting when you hear the results by different generations saying what they think the priority is. And that makes it more of a challenge, not only in the workforce, but also on the professional societies today, and how we actively recruit people as volunteers. And then I got a little about me as a speaker, gives me a little more. So with that, we're ready to launch. So you as an audience, think about, what are you? Are you a traditionalist? Are you a baby boomer? Are you an X, Y, or a Z? Now, what we did, and Bob started it before the presentation, there are the 10 questions. So as we go through the presentation, you're going to see these. They're going to be very evident what they are. And at the last, I have the answers. And like any presentation, please feel free to chat. I'm very open, very transparent. I like to make it interactive. It's a little more challenging in a digital world, but I think it's very interesting to watch people's reaction when we end up at the end at the quiz. So why don't we just launch into the question? So here was the interesting thing. Next slide, Bob. So in generations, I mean, you'll hear this topic, but what you're going to find out, there really isn't any defining organization. A lot of it really evolved more recently in the 19th century when we got into more in the sociological terms, and also when we got into the shifting economy and the mobility. And that's where you'll see generations actually being defined by, could be by books. Actually, Tom Brokaw was the one that actually categorized the greatest generation. So there isn't really any naming convention out there. And it's more or less now being followed more into the sociological arena about what it is. So as you drop down to the definitions, you'll see it's about people that are usually living about the same time, usually within a 20 to 30 year time span. And now, I mentioned a little earlier, we're actually now seeing subcategories being developed by generation. So if you look at the Z generation, which is interesting, also called the I generation, and we'll discuss that later, they now have a subgroup called Generation Alpha. So it's evolving, and it's evolving as we go along, and a lot of it's economics. So the last bullet point here is looking at a generation in terms of sociology. You're looking at age, you're looking at ideas, problems, attitudes, and some major event or events that happened during your particular generation. So the next slide is sort of the fun slide. And what I did here is based upon really 5 generations what I've shown are really the key events that really sort of highlight that generation. So we'll start with the older generation, which are also called the traditionalists. So guess what? You got the Wall Street crash, you got Pearl Harbor, you got the atomic bomb, and I actually remembered this. I was just a kid, but standing in line for vaccines, which is very interesting as we talk about COVID today. And the next, when you go over to baby boomers, you see Vietnam War. And I always ask how many can remember seeing the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. I did. Question always is interesting for our generation. I'm a baby boomer. Where were you at the Kennedy assassination? I was actually going to my government class in high school as a senior when they announced the Kennedy assassination. Then you have Martin Luther King assassination, landing on the moon, and this was funny. I didn't remember this as a major event, but when I look back, women's rights really started at the tail end of the baby boomers. Now, if you go down bottom left, you see Cold War, the wall coming down, AIDS, the Challenger explosion, computers, Desert Storm, the Desert Storm, and then you say, gee, on TV you see riots going on and burning. Well, guess what? During the X generation was the Watts riots, and a lot of destruction going on during that. Now, if you go into the Y, what do you see? Mobile phones and the evolution of mobile phones, the Twin Towers, or 9/11, the Internet, and Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, I want to point out, these are like sort of the major ones. There can be more that people identify within a generation, but what I'm highlighting here are the core ones that are usually associated with it. And now if you get into the Z generation, you get mobile devices, smartphones, interconnectivity, all of the crazy apps out there. And by the way, there are actually 20 different apps for connecting. So most of us might know Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, but guess what? There's 17 more in connecting. And then one of the other things is this generation is really aware of the environment versus the profit that you normally see in corporations. And another interesting highlight, this generation is probably one of the most oriented savings generations that's ever grown up. So I like starting with this because it sort of like grounds you and think about, gee, what was a major event that I remember during that time? Do I remember them all? Or I don't remember them, and I might remember others. So if we'll advance to the next slide. So for those that were born before 46, and this is for most of baby boomers like me, this is our folks, our parents. And interesting enough, sometimes they're also called the silent generation. That's another sort of label that they got labeled with. They're in the workforce, but very, 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 very small percentage. A lot of emphasis on rules, command and control, and a lot of face-to-face interaction. Now, the next generation, which is the baby boomers, and you notice the age here of 46 to 64, large part of the workforce, but declining. And that's because there are about 10,000 retiring a day. and many can't afford to retire, so you see a lot of part-timers, consultants and that. And that's why that's going on, because a lot of us thought that we would retire by the time we got to 65, but the goalposts keep moving out and out and out. So a lot of people didn't put away $1 million, $2 million, or $3 million in their 401k. So now they have to work to be a part of the workforce. And I hate to say it, I was growing up a workaholic. And that was sort of the way I schooled, you know, be loyal to the company, work unbelievable hours, you know, 26 hours a day, and I thought there were only 24. And that sort of defined the baby boomers. Now, if we move to the next, we're looking at Generation X. Large percentage and independent, like to balance work and family. And it's sort of a trick question, but they're not the one that wants total balance and flexibility, which is the Generation Y. And they like to really directly communicate with leaders. They really want to have access to the leaders within a corporation or on a global footprint, more so than a lot of the earlier generations. Now, Generation Y is also the millennials. So you won't hear Generation Y, you'll hear a millennia or a millennium more. Large part of the workforce, more entrepreneurial. And this is as we've started to evolve to a more mobile environment. We've seen people take a more entrepreneurial approach, and we've also seen more of the virtual starting to come into the world. And really like direct communication and feedback. So for some of us evolving in our career, some of you might not have heard, but I can tell you I came through the evolution of the 360 communication as a leader, where my superior, my subordinates, and my peers on all sides actually had input to my evaluation, so that I really started to see how I was interacting by all groups and all ages. Some companies do it today, some companies don't. But this generation really likes direct communication and feedback, so they really know where they're all. And they want a more social. I have nieces and nephews. They're very social animals. They got to be with their friends. They're on Facebook all the time. So you see a lot of Facebook activity going on. Now, the Generation Z generation is fairly new. And this was really interesting because this generation was really defined out of a book by Jean Wingate in about 2018. And the I can mean a couple things. It could be influencer, can be interconnected, but this is a very emerging generation that, interesting enough, the retail industry is really paying attention to, because they're defining on how they're going to be dealing with generation, how they're going to be buying in the retail world. And a lot of this isn't brick and mortar. So guess what do you see? You see Amazon, you see Prime Amazon, you see UPS, overnight delivery. So this is now starting to be shaped in this generation. You're going to also see in this generation a real more than ever propensity towards the planet, worrying about the planet, what's going on. And a lot of this, what you'll see, is because of their social networks, they really have huge, huge networks, and they're interfacing. I laugh because I was in a conference one time, and they were actually texting each other at the end of the conference room. And if you haven't seen it, they were actually, I thought, boy, are you listening? And they said, oh, we can multi-text. We can do a lot of things. And I said, okay, fine. Hey, as long as you're with the program, that's what doesn't matter to me. So these are the 5 generations. There's really 6 living. And with that, we'll move to the next slide. So with these generations, and I really concentrated more on the baby boomers, the X, the millennials, Z, sort of what are the characteristics, the values, and the beliefs that define it. So it's really interesting. You go from optimistic to tech savvy. The education is a birthright. And it's like, I'd rather have more experience. I can't really afford my education today. I don't know about some of you that when I did my master's degree, we were talking, and this was, my last master's degree was in the 70s. It was $120,000 to $250,000 for a 2-year program. I had my company pay for it, and that was pretty pricey. So not knowing what it is today, this is why people are lending more towards education or grants versus formal education, because people can't afford it. And an interesting one here, if you look at item 3, about job loyalty. I know my dad, he prided himself that he worked for the same company for 30-some years. And then I came along and he asked me, what's wrong with you? You're a job hopper. You can't keep a job more than a couple of years. And I said, Dad, I didn't have $100 million to buy that acquisition. And he said, well, I don't understand these young people today. And so today you're starting to see more on gaining experience. They're less as loyal to a job. You can actually see people change a job the same week that they were hired, and they say, this is not right for me. I'm going to leave. And that's been a real problem in the workforce today. Another area is, for those, I know it was my older aunt, she had to have the top labels on everything. And me, it was like, I'm not too hip on that. Where people aren't really motivated by the wealth and the rank. They really want to know how they can impact the environment. So if you're part of a big corporation today, I mean, a lot of people aren't aware of it. The United Nations started this about 3 or 4 years ago. There are 15 centers of social responsibility, and a lot of your corporations are really tying into that with their younger generations and really having an emphasis on funding and what they're going to support. So it could be food banks or, no joke, I just got one, if I would like to be a mentor in Africa and help a developing nation. So really shifts in generations going on. And lastly here, team player. I got to be a part of the team. And then you're starting to shift, well, that's a little harder now because we're an internet. So in my environment that I've been in a totally virtual environment, and one of the common issues my team and our team has is, when are we going to get together face-to-face? We've been virtual for 3 years in our group. We get together maybe once a year in that. So this social aspect is becoming more and more as a part of the generation. And as we have talked about virtual, and if you even watch about TV today when they're talking about the current environment, about the isolation and not having the social interaction. So it's a really interesting dynamic going on today with the different generations and how they deal with isolation or don't deal with isolation. Next slide. So we got 5 generations in the workforce. We got 6 living generations. So this is really interesting because this is what spans all generations. First of all, I think, and one most important thing is respect. You respect an individual. Now, for some of us that are older, that was a very key thing that I was raised with. Now, if you've gone to other cultures, it can be very prominent on how you respect your older generation. So respect is one. Being listened to. Everybody likes to be heard and feel that they're adding value, not only within a family environment, but within a work environment. Now, one of the interesting things on item 3 is having opportunities for mentoring. And here I want to correct a misconception about mentoring. So I've heard it even recently. So mentoring does not mean old to new. Mentoring in today's environment means the exchange of information between individuals. So you could have, say, a case of a younger person that's technically savvy partnering with me that has the experience, and there's mentoring going on because they're mentoring me in technology and new techniques, but I'm mentoring them on experience. So think about that as we think about mentoring. Next question, or next answer on values is understanding the big picture. People don't like to be cubbyholed anymore. They really want to be a part of the total solution. So the more that they have a part of the big picture, the more you're going to have interaction. Bob talked to it and alluded to it a little earlier. It's about effective communication. And that also leads into the 10-20-30 rule. You have this margin of opportunity to really think about how you're communicating with another person and are they understanding it. And so, and also gets not only generational, it's cultural. So here's one for you. I'm a baby boomer. My wife is not only Generation X, she's Russian. We've been married 22 years, and daily she's asking me about questions or what do I mean. So think about that not only in your personal interaction, but about your work environment. Next is everybody enjoys positive feedback. And by that, it's positive, it's constructive. How can you go forward? How can you learn? And how is it going to make you a better person as an individual or a member of a team or into a community? And then you have an exchange of ideas. And the more that you have ideas exchanging, the better you're going to come up with what I call value solutions. Not results, but value and solutions. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So this is sort of effective showing you, based upon age, what are the types of communication that people like? So if you look at the top, basically everybody is for face-to-face. And I got a digital phone there, and it's more now into your mobile and smartphones. But you can see the decreasing amount of communication going by the age and the generation. Then you have the internet, and then you're getting into the apps. So sometimes when you look at some people, it's like, do they ever talk? It seems that they actually are sitting next to each other, communicating on their smartphone. And that can be a problem, because there's a lot of problems and concerns about the Generation Z, about higher suicide rates, depression and that, because of their lack of social interaction, because they're so heavily tied to their mobile devices. So this is a very interesting slide to ponder when you think about communicating and what's an effective way to communicate. Next slide, please. So if you look at it, today's workforce, there's really 5 active generations going on. And you see, here's some other high points that I tried to put within the slide from, actually it was a work survey. So it shows each generation and what are key events or what are things, and look at it. So you look about, okay, all of a sudden now, personal computers, internet, mobile phone, Google, Facebook, social games, tablet devices. And if you have headphones, I went nuts one day when my wife bought a gaming computer with all of the headphones, and it was like an arcade game, And she said this was cool. And I said, well, I'm having a little difficulty with that. But it was effective for her, and she enjoyed it. So think about today in your workforce, not only generations. Now, this is what's interesting in the research, when I did generational research, that there are generations in each culture that we think about, and they actually have a nomenclature, and they have characteristics. So what I'm showing you is basically the American generations. Now, it could be different in England, it could be different in France, it could be different in India, China, Mexico, and that. So think about, as you're thinking about our generations and how it is in our workforce today, think about it as if you're on virtual teams like I am, that it's interesting to sort of get their perspective on how they view different generations or how they interact in that. So that comes to be very, very key. So think about that. So focus 5 generations, but also how it might mean in a different culture. Next slide, please. So challenges of a multi-generation workforce. Now, one of the questions, and it's not on this slide, and the answer is stereotyping. The worst thing that you can do is, based upon a generation, sort of box them in and stereotype a person. So think about your generation. When I grew up, I remember, and I was sort of resentful, everybody over 13 was a juvenile delinquent. And I said, I don't get this. I'm not a juvenile delinquent. I participate in community events and that. So be careful of when you think about stereotyping. Really value the person as an individual and their contribution. Now, in the workforce today, one of the biggest challenges today we're seeing is doing more with less. A lot of companies are sort of taxing their workforce because they're cutting back, but honestly, they'd rather have you work more, than subject you to a layoff. And some of us have gone through multiple layoffs in the earlier generations. So they're being more sensitive to the workforce. Yeah, and they're also being to the stress. One of the biggest challenges that goes on is, how do you communicate between a manager and an employee? And also, here's another one for you too, leader. And a leader doesn't necessarily mean that you're at the top of somewhere in the organizational chart. A leader, by definition today, is somebody that knows how to influence. And so before it was, oh, they're in the org chart, they're a leader. Well, guess what? No longer holds water. And think about how you communicate between your manager or manager's manager. Another thing that's happening today, which is a real challenge, is trends and regulations are going on like crazy. And if you talk to the higher levels today, they will tell you there's so much going on that they have to be aware of when they're working in the workforce. They try to umbrella their employees, but there are a lot of things going on, so they're only trying to pass on the relevant stuff to you to be effective. And then one of the things, and you've seen more and more in today's environment, I see today in like SAP environment, is there's more trying to create a work-life balance. I started out in the military, and I'll share a joke with you. One day I went in the sergeant, and I was talking to him. He says, so are you going to get married? And I said, well, I don't know. And he said, well, if you need a wife, they'll issue to you. Otherwise, don't worry about it. And I thought, what a thing to say to me. But now you would never hear that dialogue going on. You're going to be sensitive to the individual, where they are and who they are, than ever before than some of the earlier generations. And I think a key thing here is what's motivating that generation or individual within that generation. So as you see on the news today, what's going on and you're identifying them with a particular generation and their motivations. Also understand how it's going on in the workforce today. And it has a lot of significance on how you communicate and how effective you are. Next slide, please, Bob. So here's a little, and it's sort of busy, but it sort of gives you an idea on what's going on in the workforces today and learning styles. So a lot of the older generations, a very individual learning, command and control, big classrooms. I actually had a classroom in college of several hundred. You wouldn't hear that today because it's more individual, it's more virtual, looking down at the bottom, more of an open campus than you'll ever see before. So that shows you how learning styles are shifting. And that goes with communication. And so today, it's really prompting of all of us to really think about how we're learning and then how we're communicating. Next slide. So there are 9 steps to instruction, and a little more than a lot of us like to think of, but this is actually the benchmark for the learning industry, which I was really surprised when I think about what I'm stressing to my teams on how many steps there are. So the first and most important thing is you got to gain their attention. And one of the interesting comments, and I have all generations reviewing my slides. I'm very bulletproof. What am I doing wrong? All of everybody's looking for content. They're looking on the topic. The younger generations are looking for, guess what? Innovative and engaging. That's what they're looking for. And so one of the things that you want to do is you want to orientate the person that's learning to what are you going to want them to get out of it. So in some presentations, I always have takeaways that you should get out of it. So that's really, what should you really get out of this presentation? And then really as you think about storytelling, you think about trying to make people recall experiences or call upon their knowledge so they can really relate to the topic that you're dealing about. I mean, how many of you remember, and boring is, I won't say that, I'll get in trouble, but going to a professor and, here's the topic and I'm going to give you 30 minutes, there's no interaction, this is the way it is, I don't want your input, I'm the professor. It was like, believe me, I grew up that way. And now it's really sort of a fun environment. And here, like I said, content rich. You're getting something that not only you can apply to your professional life, you might be able to apply it to your personal life. And this is becoming more and more a factor of the X, Y, and the Z generation. More you'll see that. And then providing learning guidance, sort of guiding the learning so that you help people get to the stated objectives and really get something out of it. So that's sort of a fun thing. So when Bob talked to me about the quiz, I thought, well, that's sort of a different approach. Let's try this. And then at the last, informative and most important, constructive. You want to have constructive feedback. And it was, what can I do better? Should I add more content, less content, whatever? And so the more that you do that, the more that you're going to have a very, very good presentation or a learning experience. And then today, especially in today's work environment, I don't know what your work does, but every project that we do, we have a lessons learned. What did we learn from this? What could we do better? how can we apply it for the next project or the next interaction? And then a key thing here on the 9th step is, how are you going to retain it? How are you going to help them retain it? If the more meaningful it is, the more people will retain it. If you don't, psychological term from my psychological days, it goes to extinction fast. It was like, what did he talk about? Oh, yeah, I don't know. I was there, but I didn't get anything out of it. And if you look at all of the fun stuff today, and I even see this today, is some of these fun virtual games that are going on that you can play with. Next one, please. So in training, and this is pre-COVID, so a lot of things were going on delivery and considerations. And it was like everything goes. I mean, YouTube, training videos. In a lot of the groups that I did, we went more in recording it because people didn't have the time. And so, but on their lunch hour or maybe after hours, they could pull up and listen to it. So in other organizations that I belonged to a few years ago, we really started recording stuff. How many people today, when they want to do something or learn something, they go to YouTube? And of course, you had, instructor-led classes going on in that, and mentoring, or even in our work environment, we have job shadowing for mentoring. You can mentor, you can job shadow somebody to learn something, learn a new skill, and it helps you grow as an individual. So in considerations, is it relevant? Is it going towards a specific goal? How is it motivating a person? Is it really motivating them to be a part of the discussion and then learning from it? And I think the really consideration is, especially when you're interacting in a working environment or a learning environment, you really want people to contribute, and you want to feel respected. You don't want to put them down for their question or whatever, because there's merit behind why they're asking the question. Sometimes it takes a little help to help formulate what they're asking, but I've found out there's merit to every question that's asked. And in some cases, I find out it really can be a great solution. Next slide, please. So along comes COVID. What a major shock for a lot of us. A lot of us never saw the economic downturn like we've ever seen before. All of a sudden, no more brick and mortar, no more face-to-face because of restrictions based upon what's going on in different states or even cultures. I'm part of a virtual team, so I'm always fascinated listening to other teams on how they're learning or how they're interacting or not interacting based upon their environment. So not only is it state to state in the United States, it's very different in every culture. And so that's something to be very cognizant of. And so in today's COVID environment, what you're seeing more and more is digital learning. You're seeing more and more on the digital front, because partly also of the generations Y, but more of Z on the digital presence. So that's a key thing that's going on. So you're seeing like less personal, but you're seeing more virtual. And I apologize, one of the things, Bob's good at this, he's got his little square there and we can see him. I got a great screen. I found out I didn't have a webcam on it, so now I've got to get a webcam, because that is now becoming an important part of the learning process, that you can see the individual in interaction with them. But here's an interesting thing too on your webcam is, what is your background? So is it distracting or is it enhancing? That actually is a very key thing today in learning, or actually interviewing. So with the digital experience, there's positive and negative. So how are you dealing with the digital experience today? Next slide, please. So what do you want to avoid? So you want to buy formal language, academic language. I'm not going to lead to you, but I'm going to give you a little story. So I came home from a college, and my mom told me, well, impress me. And I said, what do you mean impress me? She said, well, you know, we're helping you pay for your college. I want to show you, I want to see that you're really learning something and showing me your vocabulary. Well, guess what? I was a research biologist and all of that, so you can imagine my vocabulary. So I looked out the window and I said, okay, Mom, I'm going to show you something. There's a Lepidoptera landing on a higher flowering angiosperm, sticking its proboscis in the parenchyma cells, causing hypertrophy. And she looked at me with this blank stare and she said, what did you just say? I'm going to go wash your mouth out. And I said, Mom, there's a butterfly landing on your roses out there, and they're pollinating it. She said, why didn't you say that? So that's sort of a thing to look at, is avoid jargon, avoid big words. In the Air Force, and I was a member of the Air Force for 10 years, we were scored that we could not score higher than 6th grade on communication. So if you had 6th grade or lower, you got to finalize it and present it in your squadron or to your commanders or even your publications. Anything higher than that, they would not allow you to do it. So that's where I learned. You really think about how you're communicating. This sounds funny. I've been married to my wife 22 years, and she's Russian, and sometimes she's asking me words that to me are very basic. So think about how you're communicating and how effective you're communicating. Next slide, please. So here's the 10-20-30 rule. And this just came out a couple years ago for presentations. 10 slides, or 10 minutes, or 10 slides, excuse me. 10 slides, 20 minutes, 30 font. So that means you really have to think about what you're putting on your presentation. So just to give you an idea, the heading up there is 30 font. So you're not going to get very much on the slide. So you really have to think about what you're putting on your slides today. And you'll see color, pictures. You really want to engage your audience. And so less is better, more focused, and a lot of content. Next slide. So think about this today, and I think this is interesting in light of generations. So, and I took this off the ASQ website. These are the 6 hot topics for ASQ today. Malcolm Baldrige, certification, cost of quality, food safety, Six Sigma, social responsibility. So I put it up there saying, based upon our chapter and what we're doing as leaders, thought leaders, or with our membership and looking at their generation mix, what would they say? And we should have done this, Bob, is think about questions. What would be your priority to what is the most significant hot topic for ASQ or our particular chapter? So that's sort of a thought-provoking thing. And it could be the industry you're in or something going on with your way of life or your job and that. So think about it, or personally, where you're at. Next slide, because I want to be cognizant of time, too, as we're going along here.
I would think, given today's environment, risk management and global supply chain risk management would be hot topics.
Yeah, and then risk, actually, it's in Program Management Institute, PMI, we have a risk management certification that is so low compared to the PMP, it's significant. And what you said, food safety, disruption in the supply chain are hot today. And you're seeing new terminology. So remember I told you key takeaways? So this is something that I learned in doing presentations. So, you know, what does an audience think about from the presentation? Well, there's 5 active workforces or generations within the workforce. So don't stereotype people, but sort of look at where they're at and how they might be affected by their ideas, their problems, their attitudes, and experiences. And so that's where you want to get out of stereotyping and sort of try to understand them as an individual and what their motivations are. And I think overcoming challenges, one of the key things that I look at, respect the differences. Differences can mean strengths to the solution. And are you having a two-way discussion, or even more than two-way? I mean, it could be visual, it could be hearing, it could be written. So there could be more than two-way communication. Two-way was sort of the old way to think about it, but people can multitask this way, so think about it. And especially with COVID today, think about what are alternate ways to learn and to deliver. And there's a lot of interesting stuff involving in the education community today. And it's something to be really aware of because it's really going to shape us now going forward as we think about COVID or post-COVID. And then key is make sure that your presentations are brief and they're very focused, engaging, and innovative. And so we'll go to the next slide. Guess what? Here's the answers. So I sort of learned it from the PMI and how they ask questions for the PMP. First question, all of them define a generation. How many living generations are there? 6. Which generation is the I generation? Z. Which of the events did not define the baby boomers? The last 3, 9/11, Desert Storm, and mobile phones were not part of the baby boomers. Item 5, what are the top 2 values all generations share? Respect and being listened to are the top 2. Best means of communication, digital. So this is sort of a sneaky trick question. What generation is all about work balance and flexibility? And it's the Y generation. X started talking life balance, but flexibility really now went into the millennia. What is the #1 challenge for today's workforce? Stereotyping. Don't put people in a box. I know I don't like to be put in a box. I like to be outside of the box. So don't stereotype person. Look at a person, who they are and what they bring. And a lot of times they enrich more of the team based upon their culture, their age, and their experiences. How many stages of instruction? 9. Too many, but there are 9. And the 10-20 rule, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 slides, 30 font. So remember that, or, excuse me, I get this confused in my mind too. It's 10 slides, 20 minutes, 30 font. So none of those. So I will tell you that when I do a presentation in PMI, they won't allow me more than actually 20 slides. And they'll come back and say too many. But that is the benchmark today. And if we'll go to the next one, because I'm really watching our time. Any questions out there from the audience that you would like to chat? Feel free. Bob can open it up and ask about the presentation.
Yeah, so I am opening it up so everybody, you can unmute yourself if you wish, or you can just type a question in the chat box if you'd like. Let's see if I can unmute everybody. I'm trying to do that. I'm having difficulty right now.
Usually, as the administrator, they usually have a capability that allows you to do it.
Yeah. I know if I unshare, I can do it. If I stop sharing, now I can see all of our attendees and I can unmute everybody. So I'm going to try unmuting everybody. Not sure what's going on in your respective location. If you have any pets barking or cats meowing or fish bubbling. I'm going to unmute everybody. If you wish to be muted, you can mute yourself again. But so, are there any questions for John about the 5 active generations? There were a couple of chat discussions that I was going back and forth with a couple of our participants. One comment really was a very nice presentation. Found it a quite accurate depiction as far as overlap between Gen X and millennials. Another person said, thank you for the benchmarks for presentation today. Should be a great help. Back when you were talking about mentoring and that it's not, I'm going to mute everybody again. Again, if you have a comment, please go ahead and unmute yourself. Comment was, when you were talking about mentoring and the fact that it's not necessarily old to young, I mentioned in the chat session that back in 3M, we had instituted an effort called reverse mentoring, where the senior leaders of the company would sign up to be mentored by a Gen Y on the use of social media, digital communication, and just to have a one-on-one dialogue about, well, what are your communication preferences? What are your work-life balance perspectives? So it was an opportunity for the younger employees to have a direct dialogue with our senior leaders. And of course, we had implemented 360-degree appraisals before that, where, as you mentioned, not only your supervisor, but maybe his or her manager, or maybe even a director, plus all your peers and colleagues, they all had an opportunity to comment on your performance. So that's something that we were doing.
Yeah, what I instituted in the Air Force is, and actually became an Air Force adopted project, I would pick an airman for the day, my NCOs would, and they would follow me in all the meetings that I could allow them to go, because I did have classified meetings, and they were allowed to participate and give their view, so I could have 1 stripe, 2 stripes, multi-stripes. You know, I was a young lieutenant and a captain. And it took on then as a wing thing to do, but it wasn't, you know, I'm the captain or the OIC in that. It was directive. And we actually became the #1 squadron in the Air Force, and then they adopted it as a project. So I was looking at, hey, I got a lot to learn. My chief has been in the military longer than I've been alive, so if I don't think I can learn from him, I'd be crazy. And then he was interested to learn from me. And then as our squadron got together, it became a really, you know, really integrated group, more than a lot of squadrons. And so that was where I started picking up on mentoring and stuff, and then I just carried it out when I got into the, you know, the private sector.
Right. Yep. Earlier in your presentation, you had also mentioned about reviewing lessons learned in any project. That's one of the things that I've been accustomed to looking at, what I call an after-action review. Where the team sits, and after the project is closed, we evaluate as a team, well, what worked, what didn't work, what would we do differently, What were some of the lessons learned? And that helped to facilitate replication of our project in other areas of the organization. So I think that lessons learned is very useful, especially, as you mentioned, John, working with a multi-generational workforce.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you have this, especially, you know, like we are now with global teams and multicultures and that. It's really interesting when you ask them about, well, what's your perspective? And some of the stuff they come up with is like, where are you at? And they said, well, even in my region of the country, it would be different than one of my colleagues on the phone. It's like, really?
Yeah.
And that's why I say the more that you interact and the more you learn personal motivations and you get your team directed, the results that you see are phenomenal because you're really looking at so many avenues and then coming up with the best solution. The results become phenomenal that I've seen in my career.
Yeah. Okay, well, I don't see any hands raised. Let's see, I do have a comment here from Richard Henrick, I apologize. Let's see. As a quality manager, I'm trying to scroll down so I can read the screen. There we go. As a quality manager, I would bring a junior employee to the quarterly business review where they would learn more detail about the factory, and it gave them a new perspective as to why certain actions and policies were in place. And a great thing about that approach is, especially if you can identify an employee in your organization who's considered a key hub. A key hub is an individual who doesn't have position power, but yet has a lot of influence amongst his or her peers in college. Mm-hmm. So if you can identify who that key hub is and get those individuals connected, then they can help spread the message and really help deploy your plans and strategies, and they can be the sounding board to bring back to the leadership team. So it's a total engagement by all of the workforce. So that's a great business practice, is to bring some of the junior people in. Another thing that we always did in 3M, whenever any member of our senior leadership team gave a presentation, like to the entire division, business unit, or even to the entire company, what we would always do is we would have people at the different doors of the conference room, and this would also be virtual. Mm-hmm. And as employees exited, we would ask them, so what did you hear? What did you take away from this? And then those messages got back to the senior leader so that he or she could reflect on, did they get the message I was trying to send, or do I need to improve my communication style? So it's one of those continuous learning opportunities. Was the message sent the same as the message heard? And if not,
one of the interesting things that we're doing, Bob, on PMI for that organization, or especially because of volunteers and targeting the X and Y, your board members are vice presidents. You know, mm-hmm. We have that title as vice presidents. And what I instituted first was I have an AVP that's either an X or Y generation. So they work with me. They can sit on the board, but when we get into the board stuff, they're actually dismissed because they can't be a part of the voting. But we've seen more interaction because of that, and because we wanted to have more of the X and Y generation being a part of it versus just being, say, considered top heavy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what we try to do in the section, whether it was the Minnesota section or now the Phoenix section, try to encourage some of our members to attend our planning sessions. So we have a member at large kind of representing our members, because we as the leaders, we're kind of isolated, insulated. I mean, we think what our members need and want. And we have surveys, as you are well aware, that we try to quantify that and verify our perceptions. But it's good to have that voice part of the planning session to say, well, I don't know if that's really value added to our members. We should, maybe this isn't a high priority, it's a lower priority. We should shift some effort elsewhere. It's good to get that one-on-one and have that voice of the member present in our planning session. That's why if anybody at all is interested in participating on our board, I'm going to put in a shameless plug. Please identify yourself. We need a newsletter editor. It's not a lot of effort. The process is pretty well defined. We need a newsletter editor because our current newsletter editor, who's been on the job for 17 years, bless his heart, he's decided to retire at the end of the year. And the newsletter is one of our two primary communication vehicles with our membership. So if it's not the Sundial newsletter, it's our websites. And it's a critical communication piece. The Sundial we push out, the website is a pull. And so it's a critical communication tool. This is a great opportunity for anyone who's a member of the section and they'd like to be more involved with the operation, the intricacies of the section. This is a great need that we have, and it's a wonderful learning experience about how ASQ operates, how the section operates. You can make a very important contribution to the section. So a great way to become involved. Let's see, any other, Richard also said to encourage discussions during lunch and on Fridays at his organization, they show 2 TED Talks selected by employees, one business related, one fun. Great suggestion. I love TED Talks. I have a subscription to TED Talks. So whenever a new one comes out, I'm on YouTube watching a TED Talk. There are some of them that are definitely in my top 10, and I would recommend them to anybody. And they also teach you how to give an effective presentation, as John said. What is it? 30 font, 20 slides, 20 minutes, 10 slides, something like that.
Yeah.
The 10, 20, 30 rule.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's a great exercise of how to deliver a meaningful presentation with just a few slides, and a lot of visual element too. Well, thank you, John, for your wonderful presentation. You got a lot of
thank you for the opportunity.
A lot of positive comments so far. To our audience, I would like to remind everybody to please complete the evaluation survey. We do read each and every one of them, especially your comments about future presentations, topics, speakers. We're always looking for input. So please be watching for that thank you email from John Limlin. It will include the survey link and also your RU certificate. Next month, of course, the second Thursday falls on November 12th. We have a guest speaker from distances out east, Grace Duffy, who has been an active member of ASQ for, oh my gosh, decades. She and I go back way back. When I was the chair of the statistics division, she was the chair of the quality management division. So we've known each other for, oh goodness, 20 plus years. And she's been on the board of ASQ. So great to have her as our presenter. She'll be introducing best practices, but there's actually a website and a book about how to identify best practices. And so what you will see coming out on our website, that will be the My ASQ website, will be a link to the book that's free to download, as well as a link to the website, which will tie into her presentation. Also a reminder, November is World Quality Month. And what we will be doing during the networking session is I hope you bring with you, this is your homework assignment, bring with you a nomination. Who would you nominate to be your personal quality hero? So someone in your organization, someone in your experience, whether it's outside of work, at work, who would you identify as your quality hero and why? What was their impact on you? I can tell you right now, my quality hero was my very first manager at 3M. His name was Galen Britz. He was my mentor through well, he retired before I did, but throughout my first 25 years of my 35-year career, he was a world-recognized quality expert, maybe not to the level of guru yet, but he was my quality hero. He taught me so much about quality, and not the hard tools. We're talking about the soft skills, the leadership. What does it mean to truly be a leader and in the quality arena? So please, we encourage you, let's open up this networking session next month and hear from you. Who are your quality heroes? Who is your quality hero and why? And then in December, we have Rachel Shaget, who is our student chapter liaison. She'll be giving a presentation on Six Sigma for Dummies, but to keep with the theme of the season. She's kind of retooling her presentation to be around toying with Six Sigma, kind of like Six Sigma at the North Pole. So it's a great learning opportunity about what is Six Sigma and how to get started and how to do it. And then what we're hoping to do, again, during the networking session of that month, is to have these, different rooms to have discussions. So we're hoping to have that set up as well. I want to thank everybody for joining us. It's been an excellent, excellent evening. Thank you, John, again, for your wonderful presentation. And everybody have a good week, a good month. Stay safe, keep healthy, and we'll see you next month. So long.